Welcome to the Lentil Intervention Podcast, talking all things movement, whole food nutrition and environmental wellness with your hosts, Ben and Emma.
Hello everybody and welcome to episode 25. We're getting on through the year. My name is Ben Aotearoa, coming to you from Auckland, and Emma Strutt from Boona. Hello Emma.
Hello Ben, how are you?
Very good, thank you. And very excited for today's guest. Now, probably a little bit of a challenge for him because he's a very, very visual type person, but a very important guest to have on the show to cover some very, very topical sort of elements. So Emma, I'll hand it over to you.
All right. We have Geoff Reid joining us for a chat today. Geoff is a New Zealand nature photographer, a passionate environmentalist and activist who is driven to share stories of the incredible flora and fauna that inhabit this planet. And importantly, he does a brilliant job of conveying the need to protect them. So Geoff contributes to a number of environmental protection organisations and is currently campaigning really hard to raise awareness of the disastrous environmental impacts of intensive winter farming in New Zealand. I think this will be an eye-opening discussion. So Geoff, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, kia ora team. Thanks for inviting me to be on the show.
Now, welcome, Geoff. Thank you so much for coming on, as we said. Let's start off a little bit about yourself. Tell us a little bit about your background and why the passion for the environment.
Well, I guess I had a pretty decent upbringing. Lots to do in the outdoors. Parents are pretty good at getting us out there, and we'd go for long stints out in camping, with the family. And yeah, just managed to. I was privileged enough to have that sort of deep connection develop in the young stages of my life, like I have had, and I think that's probably where it stems from. Being out and exposed to beautiful parts of the country. I also grew up in a pretty urban environment till I was just about a teenager, and then we were really lucky to move out of Auckland City as such and move a bit further north to, we had a lot of bush and a lot of streams and a bit of an estuary to play in, so you get to observe nature and see how it all works.
Great. And how did you get into wildlife photography and environmentalism?
Oh, I picked up a camera probably about a decade ago. I was doing a lot of restoration work, conservation work, volunteer work, and also getting out into the back blocks of the country, you could say, and coming across so many fascinating things. I thought, no one really sort of understood what I was up to, and this is pre-phones really having cameras, so yeah, I decided to get a camera and start documenting what I was coming across.
Now, I've seen some of your many amazing content that you've created, and you've got amazing knowledge of the bush, the wildlife. Did you study down that path, or is that just something you've acquired through being out there, literally on the ground and learning?
Yeah, I guess that's where the study's taken place, not so much in a building, but more sort of out in the forest. And you come across many interesting people in this country that are dedicated to restore and help out our environment. And these types of characters, they're old hands in the game. They just know so much. So soaking up knowledge of these types of people has been key.
Now, as Emma mentioned, you're involved in a broad number of campaigns. You do work with various organisations, creating content. What is some of the work you're currently involved in?
I'm really involved in environmental restoration. So I belong to a couple of community groups where we're trying to protect old remnant patches of lowland forest or waterways or marine areas. And one of the big threats to our remaining natural places is invasive species. Obviously, humans have come in and cleared the habitat. That's what's caused a lot of the extinction. But next, big waves from introduced organisms, and plants are a really big threat. Garden jumping plants that hop the fence and go into our national parks or into our reserves and cause havoc and dominate all of our endemic and our native vegetation. So yeah, it's something I'm pretty heavily involved in. But as well as sediment has been a big problem for our community up here in Auckland. Lots of growth going on, development, housing, lots of pressure and land activity. You get sediment runoff, goes into our streams, goes into our marine area, chokes and smothers life. So yeah, that and forest collapse on top of all the water advocacy I've been involved with definitely keeps me busy.
Yeah. So it pains me to say this as an Aussie, but the possums, they're a really big problem over there, aren't they? You've been involved in the
huge.
giant rata tree campaign. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Oh, that was a really neat campaign. We had great support for it. Some buddies had put in a bit of a shift to try and protect a tree that was only rediscovered or discovered not so long ago. We're talking a really big tree, 1.5 highway lanes wide. And this is a fascinating tree because it starts off life as a vine in the top of the canopy and grows a root trunk down to the forest floor, and then will choke out a tree over 1,000 years or so, and it's a really important part of our lowland forest, but possums just love them. So there's not very many giant rata left, or there's not very many rata left in general, and these ones are in serious trouble, and ran a quick campaign, and we've managed to get the Wellington Regional Council to commit to doing an initial aerial control to help protect this forest. But yeah, it's ongoing, which is what's needed.
I think people are going to have to get creative with possum control and maybe tag and release, but release back in Australia somehow. So, well, that would be a monumentous process, wouldn't it?
Yeah, when you're talking like 40 million possums, and they've evolved over here, they're different in size and weight to the ones in Australia. We do have a massive problem on our hands. And being a vegan myself, what do? Do we sit back and watch our forests collapse? We know we can't do it by trapping. We would have solved it by now.
And the bird life as well.
Bird life, yeah. These forests are so important for climate, for water purification, for so many things. And at the moment, it's not looking good across the whole of New Zealand.
Yeah. Well, look, we're definitely going to get stuck into some some deep dives here with some of these topics. Now, I heard you present just over a month ago at a presentation or a sort of a seminar called A Change of Heart. Dr. Mike Joy was there talking about water, as we well know, a very popular guest on our show. We had Shane Ward, whom we've also interviewed a few episodes ago, talk about regenerative agriculture and soil quality and so on. But your presentation was, and I've said this before at the start, hugely impactful because it's visual. It's one thing to put graphs up, it's talk statistics, it's important, but yours was just visual. And, a lot of people were left quite shocked because it's a kind of thing that's out of sight, out of mind. Now, for our listeners, yes, I've been very vague. What are we talking about? So let's get stuck in. Let's talk about winter crop grazing. Can you start off by telling our listeners, or all of us, what is winter crop grazing? What's the process? What entails? What's it all about?
Yeah, so what we've been campaigning against is the intensive part of winter crop grazing. So, and that just means you've got these bad effects. So what happens really? What's happened in New Zealand is that we've maximised our animals on our landscape, and for dairy, this means that in the wintertime on our milking pastures, if we kept the huge amounts of animals close to the milking sheds or where we have that nice grass for them, they'd destroy it, they'd pug it up, turn to mud. So a solution is to put them in trucks and take them to another part of the country that's where there's been big crops planted, and they'll be grazed throughout the winter. These are pregnant mothers. They give birth on these big intensive winter grazing crops, and afterwards they get taken back to the farm that they came from, and they're usually in a better condition because they've had a really rich diet. So it's not just dairy, but we're also talking sheep and beef, deer, all animals are going through this because we've reached such a high amount of numbers of animals.
So the crops they moved to for the intensive crop grazing, those are crops grown specifically for that.
Yeah, so they'll will grow fodder beets or kale or rich monoculture. And then the animals when they put on the crop, they're given like a metre or so a day until they transition into this new diet. And then they'll be given, up to 5 metres a day, and they'll be strip grazed. So the electric fence gets moved every 5 metres throughout the winter. What this causes, if it rains, a massive amount of mud. You've got 300, 500 animals on a paddock, or up to 2,000 animals on a big area, and you just have huge deep pugging. I've seen cows up to their udders in mud, calves all the time dying in the mud because they can't stand up and walk. The animal welfare issues are so bad. There's nowhere for these animals to lie down and rest. It's the winter time in parts of the country. It's so cold, so brutal, and this is in Southland and Otago alone. We're talking up to 2 million animals.
And you mentioned the animal cruelty aspect of it. I've seen some of the footage, and it really is quite confronting and horrific. Is this legal?
Yep. There's nothing to really stop it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's part of the process. It's okay. So when we say it's legal, I mean it's the system. So the farming system, it's for them. It's deemed as it's compliant. But what about the animal welfare organisations like SAFE, SPCA, all those? How did they see? I mean, is that legislative? That it's there's nothing wrong with that part of the process.
Well, no, there's an animal welfare code in this country, and this practice breaches it. So, what happened with our campaign that we ran last year in 2019? We really, I was coming from an environmental aspect, because it's not just the cows or the animals that have been put through this, it's our rivers. All the sediment pollution, herbicides, insecticides, fertilizer, everything, and nitrates, it's all ending up in our rivers, into our lakes, into our estuaries, and then going into our groundwater, which is affecting drinking supply, and it's going into our ocean, where we really don't know the effects that are happening there. So, but the more and more you dive into it, the more you can see the animal welfare issues are just as bad. And to try and get the general public behind the environment is quite hard. So you go the animal welfare issue, don't you? And which is a good place to start. And so our 2019 campaign, we really focused on the animal welfare issue. And a result of our campaigning, we forced Damien O'Connor, which is the Minister for Agriculture and Primary Industries, to set up a task force to address these animal welfare issues. So, it looks like a bit of project it looks like a bit of progress. This task force set up a bunch of recommendations to, our Ministry for Primary Industries and to try and help pull the industry in, but we've seen no change, and I think that they think they can prosecute their way out of this mess, but we need real solutions to multiple tools to achieve big change.
And you've been very clear before that you're not kind of calling out individual farmers; it's a systemic kind of problem.
Our systems, our farmers are locked into a system which is really hard to change. Basically, we're capital gains farming. That's the way I see it. A couple of generations ago, old mate, great grandfather buys up a bit of land, drains a couple of wetlands, cuts down a bit of bush, puts up a few fences, and whammo, chucks in his animals, and there you go. And then he retired and sold the farm to his son, who took out a mortgage and to service his loan, he's put in a few more animals and drained a few more of the wetlands and cut down a bit more bush, and then the next generation comes in and he buys the farm off his old man and has a big loan and puts in some irrigators, sucks some water out of the rivers and cuts down the rest of the bush and drains the last of the wetlands and puts more animals, and then then the next generation comes along, and it's something you hear from the farming community a lot, like, we've always done it this way, and they have. It's always been a model that's built on intensification and getting, putting Mother Nature to work, putting more and more fertilizer on and just expecting to be able to keep going that way. I mean, we've maxed out the capacity of our landscape now. The pressures are so much now that they're affecting human health.
Yeah. And I know that farming is a big contributor to the economy in New Zealand, but I've heard you say before that you can't pollute your way to prosperity. And it really is, trashing the clean, green tourism image. One of the major draw cards for going to New Zealand, apart from, Lord of the Rings and Hobbits, is to get out in the great outdoors and see the beauty of the country. And that's really being affected by this system, isn't it?
Yeah. But I will add to that, is that when people think of water quality and pollution and, sediment and stuff, we just instantly go for, animal agriculture, like milk and dairy and beef. But the horticulture industry is so much to blame, and they get a free pass, and I want to hear the discussion being had a lot more around intensive horticulture, because as people switch over to a plant-based diet, it's not just about cutting these certain things out of your diet and eat veggies or whatever. There's still these massive monocrops of onions dumping nitrates, and the amount of sediment, phosphate, continuous tilling and turning of the soil, and just losing carbon and just thrashing the structure of the soil and allowing the topsoil to be lost to wind erosion and you name it. Horticulture is not perfect.
Yeah, you raise a very valid point there. We get so tunnel vision about what we perceive as one issue, and we think that anything else is better than that one issue. But as we've seen in history with a lot of other things, is we might think, okay, we've won this battle, we've alleviated this problem, and then at the same time we're creating a whole new problem, and in many cases sometimes it's an even bigger problem. So like you say, monocultures and so on is a generic issue, and it's not just restricted to livestock. So the way we look after our soil, so soil quality, and obviously the impacts of deforestation, desertification, is that even a word? Or the growing amounts of deserts, all that kind of stuff. I mean, that's really what the bigger picture is. So, if we're solving one problem, we can't create a new problem or exacerbate an existing problem into becoming the bigger problem.
Yeah, totally. And the thing that frustrates me a lot is that we know that if you reduce, this is, in most cases, if you reduce the amount of animals that you're farming, you also reduce the amount of inputs to the land, so the less fertilizer, less water. There's a whole lot of costs that go down as well, and you might not be producing the same amount of produce or milk, so the Australian banks aren't too happy. But there's actually more profit to be made for the farmer in a lot of cases, and this is a system that's changed, but the banks sort of won't allow the farmers to move on.
I mean, that's in some case a concept of that whole regenerative agriculture concept, where you're having various forms of crops, whether you include livestock or not. I mean, that's for a different debate, but it's variety. And that's really where the solution is and how you mix that up. Well, that's up for debate, but that's really the way forward.
I mean, there's some really positive stuff happening in the country, and it does give me a lot of hope. Seeing farmers changing their pastoral systems over to regenerative, but it does still seem like they still won't come out publicly and say so much what's going on. I think there's a lot more than what's being publicised, and that's due to Fonterra and Dairy New Zealand and the FERT companies just putting so much pressure on these rural communities to continue with their system. They stop picking up organic milk at the gate. So
in your experience, you're seeing a lot more positive change than we're actually seeing. So like we don't see a lot of the negative impacts, we're actually also not seeing as much of the positive change that's happening, unfortunately.
Well, in saying that, I'm seeing positive change, but we're still going backwards at an alarming rate. It's not like we're we're making any ground.
Well, that was going to be my leading question. I mean, and that's where I find myself constantly questioning, in a good way, but the concept of regenerative farming, because the concept makes sense. But where we are now today in 2020, and the state of our planet, the state of our rivers, the soils, etc., is that enough? Or do we need to go to the other extreme to undo all the harm we've done for the last 60, 80, 100 years?
Well, it depends what kind of a country, planet we want to live on,
Yeah.
I think that answers that. We need to do something fast. And
so one thing I did want to touch on a little bit is, when we talk about crops standing there specifically for livestock, we know that livestock numbers continue to increase as demand for meat increases, demand for dairy increases, demand for exports increases. What's the rate of deforestation in New Zealand? That's something we don't seem to talk about here. Does it still happen?
Oh, totally, yeah. We've only got about 15% left of our forest cover, so we've lost a lot, and you don't see deforestation happening on a grand scale, but that's because we've already done that. Although I see it and drive around the country, you definitely see it, and it's just bit by bit, death by 1,000 cuts. We're still going downhill. We're still removing large amounts of scrubland just to intensify our sheep and beef industry. We're still spraying off all, manuka and setting fire to it and burning it, bulldozing it, and draining wetlands. That's a big one.
So what parts of New Zealand, I mean, is it a typical sort of dairy country? So it's happening in Southland, Otago, Canterbury Plains, Waikato, Manawatu. I mean, is that where this is continuing? Draining of wetlands?
Yeah, hill country. I got a classic example. I can chuck some video through of I think 600 or 800 hectares worth of native bush regenerating. Some really good stands of podocarp in there coming through, and the fourth generation sheep and beef farmer. He actually said to me on the side of the road, I bailed him up about it. He said, "No, this is what we've always done." And he'd sprayed, burnt, bulldozed about 600 or might even been 800 hectares of native bush. So it's pretty alarming from the sky, like the scale of it. Puts us right back up there with Indonesia. We don't look any better.
Yeah, no, that's shocking. That's and I asked that because we had some horrifying figures that came out of I guess when we spoke about deforestation in Queensland alone. What was it, Emma? About 1,100 hectares a day or something to that effect.
Oh, it's a massive amount. Yeah, and a lot of it's in the Great Barrier Reef catchment. So disastrous effects. Yeah.
Massive runoff.
So we sort of, after that episode, we were, because we were saying, why are we always up in arms with what's happening in Indonesia or the Amazon, and yet it's happening in Australia. But now the question is, well, is it still happening in New Zealand? Well, the answer is yes, just to a lesser extent because we're just a smaller landmass.
Yeah. And one thing that we sort of owe or you could call it our prosperity to is the fact that we've got really good soil in New Zealand. And that soil has come from millions of years of forest in these lowland parts. So predominantly New Zealand was covered with kahikatea forest. These are an amazing native tree. They can hold oxygen to the very tips of their roots, which allows them to be submerged underwater, for long periods of time. So you end up having these huge, big swamps with trees that are 60 plus meters tall. And they can be flooded completely. And what the European did when they came over here, or we came over here, was just cut them all down and drain all of these big swampy peat swamps, and now we've got dairy farms all over them. So we owe it to our kahikatea forests. Yet in the North Island, you can't find a lowland functioning kahikatea forest. There's a good one down in the South Island, Okarito, but it's on very porous alluvial sort of stones. So you don't have that rich soil, but it's something that we ought to put back, I think. And, it'd take 1,000 years to restore a forest like that. So it would take quite a bit of work, but it would be hard to buy up a few dairy farms and stop draining them and, put back our kahikatea forest. basically what happened, we cut down these trees for butter boxes. The timber didn't really give off much of a taste, so we milled it up and put butter in it and exported it, and then we ran out of trees.
Oh, goodness.
Oh, what we do best. Now, let's move on to our next topic. We've touched on it, but let's talk about fresh water, because like soil, like a lot of things, it's one of those things we take for granted. It's there. We can drink from it, although that's now debatable. Especially in New Zealand, we know now that at least 70% of our rivers are polluted. We know that at least 40% of our lakes are polluted. We know there's an effect on the oceans. So firstly, there's an organisation, it started off as a student-led campaign, Choose Clean Water. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, it was a really interesting campaign to be part of. I came in as a photographer to take pictures of the people we were going to be interviewing and writing up blogs on. It soon turned into a video project where we would meet an individual or a representative of a community group or hapu or iwi, or a sports group, or people that had a connection to a certain waterway or a certain wetland or something, or a lake, and we told the stories, which was really neat. We did, I think, 25 or 26 videos in 28 days, covered both islands. It was quite intense.
And you were really successful at reframing the way people kind of perceive this issue.
Yeah, I mean, up until then, like the discussion around water was really technical conversation about numbers and nitrate levels, and it was like a science debate. But this campaign was neat because we changed that to one about values and real people, and we focused on individuals, and they spoke about the wider truths about what we all value, and with healthy waterways, healthy environment. And this meant that the politicians had to respond to real people and couldn't just sort of control the messaging through their facts and numbers. And it was great because Nick Smith, who was the politician fronting the water stuff, he couldn't hide behind that technical language. And I guess it forced him and the government at the time to reveal their total lack of care for what was important to the whole country. It made him and his party pretty unpopular.
So you kind of achieved your purpose a little bit there.
Yeah, I mean, it led to, I wouldn't say it was just the Choose Clean Water campaign, but there was a lot starting off pre-2017 election, and water was like number 2, I think, which is pretty unheard of for an environmental issue being right up there for the election. And then with the 2020 election this year, the water's right back up there. It's a hot topic.
Mm. Although, again, when you say a hot topic, hot debate as well, because where we seem to be focusing is the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff approach, cleaning up rivers and pumping a lot of money into that, rather than focusing on, well, how about we stop polluting in the first place? So
exactly, and the last government reformed the freshwater policy, and it's pretty weak. There's a cap on synthetic nitrate fertilizer, but in some areas the cap's higher than what they use anyway, so it's not really going to help anything.
And let's be realistic. To get that kind of change is not going to happen in a long while, because it's a massive contributor to our economy. What the cause of the pollution is what's contributing to our economy in some sense. The exports of dairy, the exports of beef and lamb. So, are we going to wait till the damage is all done and then for drastic measures? I mean, is that the way you foresee it?
All the money that we'd make through our economy is the price, if not more, what it would cost to try and reverse the situation we're in. So it's a big trade-off, and when you tell people about the issue and they understand the detail of it, no one's for it. No one wants to see how make a trade-off like that. well, unless you're on the receiving end of the money.
With all these sort of this exposure that you create and awareness that you present, what do you see as the way forward? We know there's a lot of issues facing us at the moment, from environmental issues, but what do you see over the next immediate sort of 3 to 5 years? The way we're trending right now in New Zealand, do you think there's going to be some positives?
Well, yeah, I mean, at the moment, it's fair to say that things are dire. They're not improving. We're seeing it getting worse. But to see an improvement, we have to see the agriculture industry and the horticulture industry pulled right back in. We need our regional councils to start enforcing the Resource Management Act and taking proper action on the urban infrastructure too. These cities have got pretty bad infrastructure, and they pollute it's about 1% of the waterways that flow through our country. Agriculture's 40% or 50% or something like that. I don't know the exact numbers, but we need to see action from our regional councils. And the greenwashing, there's so much greenwashing going on that people seem to think that things are getting better. There's all this tree planting, and we're restoring waterways and country calendar, and it's not helping the situation as this intensification still continues. It's just like every small little wetland drained and more irrigators going up, and you can see it. You only have to just drive around the country and know what you're looking for. So things haven't stopped, and what we need to see is action taken from our leaders. Farmers are in serious trouble financially. People are changing what they're eating, and they're in massive amounts of debt and pressure. And the regional councils, they think they're doing them a favour by unregulating, like allowing their industry to go along unregulated, not putting a cap on these fertiliser limits, and giving them a free ride. But it's actually destroying their industry, because people are waking up and it's taking away their social license to operate. So I guess the future for water, if we want to see something positive, is we need strong leadership, and people need to demand strong leadership from our so-called leaders. So this year we focused on Landcorp, Pāmu. These are our farms. So the government, we have about 200,000 hectares of public land that's farmed, and they do a lot of intensive winter grazing. Some of the worst intensive winter grazing animal welfare and environmental farms issues that I've seen are on our farms, and it makes me quite sick, really. So, and also Landcorp, Pāmu, they've done their own modelling to show that it's more profitable to exit this type of practice, yet they won't. So it just, this is the publicly owned farms. They ought to be setting a precedent and leading by example for how we use land, what we transition into, instead of just being so old school and, whatever goes on behind scenes. We're not seeing any change. So, I'd like to see stronger leadership.
So you mentioned there that we need to be putting more pressure on our councils and our politicians. What can an individual do? Would you just recommend that they lobby their councils more often? Should they get involved in grassroots organisations? Like, what's the best way forward for an individual that actually wants to contribute to making positive changes?
Well, I guess everyone's got different skills, but we do have a voice, and you can use your vote, or you can put in submissions, and you can write letters and try and keep these things going. But
we always say, if we change the demand, then that could lead to change. So changing what we eat.
Oh, that's totally. But as far as what can the individual do to, I think, writing to your local MP, writing letters into newspapers, as well as changing what you eat, or you contribute your dollar towards. I think those, they're all good things, and it's just little steps and trying to get everyone on board.
Yeah. And do you see a role for social media? Like, you're very effective at, letting the world see what's happening through your Instagram and YouTube and whatnot. Do you encourage more people to jump on social media and get a bit more vocal?
Yeah, it's massive. You can definitely see the effects. Yeah, putting stuff out there, or just taking photos yourself. If you see something that's not quite right, why not just take a lazy snap, chuck it up online, get some discussion going. The only thing that's ever created change is people talking about this, and it snowballs into bigger and better things. So yeah, I'm all for it.
So Geoff, future projects, what are you working on at the moment? What are plans for the future?
Well, I've seen the little bit of effort that I've put in over the years to have quite a big impact. So it's quite positive what just a few people can achieve. And what I'm sort of working towards is, we're looking for benefactors, looking for a bit of funding so that I can, instead of just being myself, trying to be a one-man band, managing video and media and social media and all of that, but sort of try and grow a little bit of a crew. So yeah, if anyone out there knows anyone that might have the means to help support, publicising these issues at a bigger, better level, we're looking to try and get a videographer, some storyteller to help sort of take the pressure off me, so I can be a bit more creative and get a bit deeper into these issues, as well as getting someone maybe part-time or full-time to do a lot of research and communications to help really be effective with the messaging that we're trying to get through.
Yeah, and you've got a Patreon, don't you? We'll link that in the show notes, but where can people find out more?
Yeah, I mean, Patreon, there's an email. If you want to get in touch, go ahead.
No, amazing. No, Geoff, thank you so much. It's really good to have a raw and honest appraisal of you represent yourself, so you're going to say how it is, and that's what we need more of that. So the content that you create is exactly that. There's nothing edited, it's nothing superimposed, it's exactly how things are. It's just you get to see it, or see things that most of us don't, and it's important to share that. So look, thank you so much for coming onto the show, sharing some of your insights, some of your thoughts. We're not always going to be rosy and happy and yay, things are looking amazing. No, that's the whole point of this podcast, is to raise awareness and make us realize that we need to take action, and we need to start, as we say, inciting change. And it's got to start off by awareness, and then actually getting involved in whatever way we can. So thank you so much, Geoff.
No worries. I think you've summed it up quite well there. Thanks for having me on the show. Appreciate it.
Thanks for your time. And everyone, please do check out the visual content that Geoff produces. It really kind of helps drive the message home.
Yeah, and we will put some of that stuff up on our social media as well and link it back to Geoff. So yeah, take a look, and thanks for listening.
Thank you for listening to the Lentil Intervention podcast. If you found this interesting, make sure you subscribe and share it with your friends.